Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Our margins, like a lot of other people in our sector, are just razor thin to non-existent.
Trying to hang on. Local restaurants hope you'll drop by during the holidays, even amid the financial squeeze.
Times are tough.
Inflation sucks.
Plus,
Public's help is always needed.
Surrey RCMP are trying to find whoever opened fire at a store in Newton. It's the second violent incident at the same mall within a day. And
we're really just trying to survive, and it's a scary situation out there.
bone dry. Vast parts of BC are still gripped by drought. Businesses are wondering how they'll survive.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. This holiday season is shaping up to be a deal breaker for many people who run restaurants. The sector is still struggling to return to pre-pandemic levels, and December is usually the most profitable time of year. But as Tanya Fletcher shows us, with an affordability crisis squeezing customers and COVID loan repayments looming, some are worried they won't make it past Christmas.
It's 5 p.m. at Honeybee Bruncheonette on the edge of Vancouver's Chinatown, or as staff here call it, switchover time. During the day, it's a brunch spot. In the evening, it morphs into a taco joint or a pizza place, depending on the night.
As soon as the lights come down, it feels almost like a different space. So
Totally different vibe.
it's kind of exciting.
And you did that because you just had to, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, out of necessity.
Yeah.
Owner Matthew Senecal Junkier knew he had to maximize this space, so a little ingenuity led to several ventures under one roof, so it never sits empty. That may sound familiar, because he's done it before.
Here's the wine fridge, all the whites.
We first introduced you to him in the spring. He turned the back of this daytime cafe into a nighttime wine bar after the office lunch crowds didn't return post-COVID.
The dynamic and the drivers of the business have completely changed pre- and post-pandemic.
That was 6 months ago, when restaurant bankruptcies had spiked 116% since 2022, and it hasn't gotten better.
Our margins, like a lot of other people in our sector, are just razor thin to non-existent. There's something really seismic happening in our sector, and it's just hasn't been able to get out of that hole since the pandemic.
Those side hustles, as he calls them, generate 70% of their core business sales.
It's what's keeping us afloat.
Restaurants Canada says food service spending remains 9% below pre-pandemic levels. Nationally, more than half of companies are still either losing money or barely breaking even. And a quarter are worried they will not survive unless conditions improve, which is why industry experts say this coming month will be pivotal.
But the holiday season is the absolute most lucrative time for our businesses. I think it's going to be a make or break season for a lot of hospitality businesses out there.
He says the holiday season can make up 20% of a business's overall revenue for the entire year, and that money gets them through the slow times. And so, a plea.
I would say if you have a favorite neighborhood pub, bar, restaurant in your community, we need your support now more than ever.
But with cost pressures hitting customers on all sides, many we spoke with say they might hold back on the wining and dining this year.
Times are tough. A lot of inflation. I think everybody knows right now that even just basic groceries is very expensive.
Yeah, inflation sucks.
Instead of going to big restaurant, we just pick up food at TNT or something. It's
inflation, the economy. Yeah, I'm making careful decisions.
Holiday spending aside, federal COVID loans remain the biggest worry for many businesses. The initial deadline had been the end of this year. After much lobbying by the industry, Ottawa did extend it, but only by a few weeks into January. Now the sector's urging the feds to make it a much longer runway and to give more flexibility in paying back that money.
And they've said we can go to a bank and refinance it, but more debt is not the solution here. And also interest rates are very high right now, so that's not going to help.
As for Senecal Junkier, he took out 2 loans totaling $120,000 and isn't sure what's going to happen come the new year.
I mean, we're kind of waiting to see what December's like. It's frankly, it's going to be a stretch for us. So, we're hoping to hear back on what bank financing will look like, but there's no real clear path forward.
He says while December is usually 30 to 40% busier than the other winter months, optimism is hard to come by.
We're hoping. I wouldn't say confident, but we're definitely hoping.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
Surrey RCMP is trying to find whoever shot at a business in Newton early this morning. It's the second violent incident at the same strip mall within a day. Mounties say they were called to 81st and 128th Street just after 2 this morning after shots rang out. A jewelry store was hit. No one was hurt, but police say it does appear to be targeted.
Our officers have cornered off this area. Our investigation is ongoing, and we're gathering evidence in this business, including CCTV footage or any witness statements in regard to this investigation.
Yesterday, RCMP were called to the same plaza around 11 a.m. for reports of an armed robbery. One person was hurt in that case. Witnesses say the suspects fled in a dark-colored pickup truck. Police say they don't believe the two crimes are linked. They do ask people to send them whatever surveillance video they may have. Surrey RCMP also want you to know about a high-risk sex offender who has moved into the city. He's been deemed a high risk to reoffend. Take a look. Police say they are issuing a warning because the danger Brian Abrosimo poses to the public outweighs his right to privacy. He was sentenced in 2006 for multiple offenses, including sexual assault, kidnapping, assault with a weapon, and forcible confinement. And victims include a sex worker and an 11-year-old girl. He served about 14 years in prison. Mounties say Abrosimo was released on Thursday and will serve a long-term supervision order in the community. He'll be monitored electronically and has to follow a curfew. The RCMP is urging people to call 911 if they see him breaking his conditions. He can't go to Langley or Abbotsford. He can't be anywhere where children might be, including parks or pools, and he can't be around sex workers or girls under 18 without supervision by someone who knows his record. Mayor Brenda Locks, meanwhile, says it's, quote, reprehensible Abrosimo is being released in Surrey. She says it's a blatant example of what's wrong with the justice system. She, like police, is urging people to be careful. 'Tis the season. Whistler Blackcomb has officially opened its slopes to skiers and snowboarders. Some people even camped out overnight to be the first to go up on the mountains. But as Leanne Young tells us, the opening comes as people in that community are facing higher living costs and a housing crunch.
We're here at the base of Whistler Mountain here in Skiers Plaza, where things have been buzzing since well before 8:30 a.m. when those gates opened. All right, have a great run, guys. Huge round of cheers, and those first skiers and snowboarders were allowed to head onto the gondola for the very first runs of the Whistler Blackcomb 2023 season. Just around the corner from me, I see people dancing because that's just how much excitement there is. And we were actually here yesterday as well and spoke to a number of people who were camped out just for that big moment. Why did you guys want to be first?
I don't know,
because we want to be the number one. And
I think it's just because we're gonna be here just for this season, and we wanted to make this season a very good one. So we thought maybe being the first one would help.
So the big talk, of course, is how much snow there's going to be. Not all runs are open here at Whistler Blackcomb, which is, not exactly unusual for the start of the season. Last season they did get a lot of snow, not as much this year. What they're hoping for is, of course, more snow to build as the winter season progresses.
The way a season starts is never really indicative of the way it's going to finish up. So, we're on our ramp, and every day we'll continue to make snow. There's snow in the forecast, and we're expecting a great season here at Whistler Blackcomb.
The other thing that lots of people have been talking about, the affordability crisis that are facing not just people in here Whistler, and of course right across the country. That paired with housing has been the big talkers. Do you find that it's expensive to go out, to go to restaurants?
Yeah, I think I haven't really been to a restaurant here because it's very expensive.
Because our host parents get $1.5K in a month for because we're international students, and it gets Whistler is one of the expensive places in the world, and also the news are talking about it, and 1,500 is not enough for my host mom to feed me because groceries are so expensive, and that's not it. Yeah.
I've lived here now for 9 years, so I think we've got a pretty stable place to live, and that definitely helps. But yeah, newcomers for sure, it'd be really hard. Once you run out of savings, what do you do?
84% of Whistler workers live in Whistler, which is great, but we just cannot afford to rest on that. We need to continue to invest in housing, and we are. There's 400 bed units of housing under construction right now in Cheakamus Crossing, and that's critical to our long-term success.
The lack of housing has repercussions not only for the people that live here, for the workers, but also for employers. People saying that it's very difficult to try and staff so many, of course, the service jobs, the thousands of service jobs that make this community run. So what they're asking for this season is for patience as you come down here and take your stab at Whistler Blackcomb. Leanne Young, CBC News, Whistler.
A former Vancouver Canuck draft pick has been charged in connection with what police claim is large-scale financial fraud. Police say they began looking at 34-year-old Prab Raj Rai's actions in 2021 after a victim came forward. That victim claimed they lost millions in real estate opportunities. Police allege the fraud happened between 2015 and 2018. Rai was arrested and charged on Tuesday with fraud over $5,000. He's since been released. The Canucks drafted the Surrey native in 2008, but Rai never went on to play for the team. If you own a home or property in BC, how much will your property taxes go up next year? If they do, city halls across this province are starting to debate that as they prepare their annual budgets. But as Justin McElroy explains, many of them have a lot more flexibility than they may admit.
Over the next few months, BC municipalities will pass their budgets and raise your property taxes. And they will tell you they don't like it.
I know increases like this are hard. Frankly, they suck.
That was Ken Sim earlier this year after Vancouver passed a 10.7% property tax increase in their budget. Next year, the city is proposing a 7.6% increase. But what if I told you that in 2022, Vancouver actually had a surplus of more than $500 million? It's right there in their own financial documents. In fact, tons of municipalities across British Columbia racked up giant surpluses. Here is a chart. Now you can see Vancouver had the biggest surplus, but all of the big cities in Metro Vancouver were in the green by quite a lot. All told, municipalities in this province had a combined $3.4 billion surplus, and in total, they sit on more than $10 billion in financial reserves. So what's the reason for this? Now, unlike higher levels of government, municipalities aren't allowed to run a yearly deficit. So their financial teams tend to be very risk adverse. And they see the benefit in leaving lots of leeway so that surpluses can go in various reserve funds that are set up for all sorts of rainy day situations. It's a fair way to govern, but the next time your city claims that it's strapped for cash, remember that has as much to do with reality as it does with their accounting. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
Back in October, Canada's largest grocery chains promised Ottawa they would come up with a plan to deal with the rising cost of food by freezing prices on thousands of items. On Tuesday, the parent company of Sobeys and Safeway was first out of the gate, saying it was expanding some price freezes and canceling 1,700 planned increases. That's good news for shoppers, as the other grocery chains will likely follow suit. But critics argue a drop in food prices may not be thanks to governments or grocery giants.
Inflation's coming down on its own. So if they do put some freezes on prices going through the winter, it's hard to say whether it was because of these programs or whether those prices would have come down organically.
Statistics Canada says food inflation has been trending down. In September, the inflation rate for groceries was at about 5.8%. In October, it had dropped to 5.4%. The Surrey School District's ideas to deal with overcrowding have plenty of people talking. Those ideas include fully online or hybrid classes for secondary students and dividing school days into shifts, so some students would start early in the morning and others would finish late at night. None of those ideas have been approved yet. A UBC sociology professor says parents could struggle to find childcare if their school schedule changes.
Right now, if you were to just switch to that situation, no one's available to take care of those kids, except in a minority of the situation. So it's a problem.
Surrey is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada and is the largest school district in BC. Some parents and teachers say more provincial funding is needed to fix the problem. We are into the normally rainy fall season throughout the province, but in some places, you wouldn't know it. Parts of BC remain under extreme drought warnings, and some farmers and ranchers say they are struggling to stay afloat. The CBC's Zara Premji has more on the potential impact across BC.
While the wet weather may be back if you're in the Lower Mainland,
that isn't the case for all parts of BC.
We're really just trying to survive, and it's a scary situation out there.
This is Back Valley Ranch in Cache Creek. Usually the creek is filled with rushing water and cows have a place to go to drink. Now it sits empty.
That has never dried up since this place was bought in '76, and the creek ran dry this summer.
And the nearby grass, usually green to graze on, is anything but this season, which means the roughly 140 cows and many pigs this ranch grows, nourishes, and turns into meat are struggling to reach their necessary size to sell, not without digging even deeper into the ranchers' pockets as they pay higher prices for the resources needed to keep their farms running.
It's hard to get through the frost.
Take a 9-hour trip northeast from Cache Creek to Dawson Creek, and the problem is the same. Another one of the 16 out of 34 regions in BC that's sitting in high drought levels at this point in November.
We started digging around with a shovel, and there's top moisture now. But when you dig further down, it's powder. Can't even make a lump out of it.
Chris Moat's 640-acre farm grows the hay that's often necessary to feed the cows at ranches like Fredette's. But since he can't grow as much with the dry ground, what he has grown, he's had to keep mainly for himself.
Less feed constitutes higher feed prices. Higher feed prices is going to hit them in the grocery stores, which it looks like it already is.
And that pinch is being felt everywhere.
My fear is if this keeps up, that a lot of ranchers aren't going to be able to sustain this and this cost, and they're going to have to sell off stock, and that BC is going to lose, a resource of food.
And the province says this is a reality all British Columbians will have to get used to.
What we're seeing in the Northeast could happen to any one of the regions within the province. I do think we are going to see more of these cycles going forward, but also we have developed that expectation that water is always there, and it's not always there.
While the farmers and ranchers say they're not sure how much longer they'll be able to survive a dry spell, the province says if and when the recovery begins, it will take at least 1 to 2 years to return to normal, with hopes that slow, steady rain brings the dry spell to a close. Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
Darius Madavi joins us now with a first look at the weather. Some concerning just viz you see there, digging under the ground, and it's nothing but dust.
Yes, it's very different to see that in reality than just to look at a drought map like this, because we've been looking at this for a long time. You can see that according to our update today, really the only change is here on the north coast, where we have had some significant moisture streaming in, and over the next few days going to be the only place we might even see some scattered showers. Other than that, we're looking dry across the province. But I think we should look at some of the trends that we have been seeing this year. Now, take this. This is one example of what we've been seeing on the south coast in Victoria. We saw very much below average rainfall from the start of the year. And then in the fall, we've seen it pick up to around average. So if we're going to take just this section, it would look like we have average rainfall. That's the case across much of the south coast, not all of it. In Vancouver, we've had fairly average precipitation, but some of the other indicators that determine drought have not been in our favor. Look at Fort Nelson, though. You can see that we have had, again, very much below average precipitation since the summer, and we're incredibly below. And so the drought indicator here, if you have rainfall that is in the bottom 2%, the 2% of the driest years that we've ever had, that was what determines drought level 5. And so that's why the Northeast is still in a drought level 5. Look at Kamloops, which is the closest station to Cache Creek. You can see that since the summer, we've been below average, but not as much. Here, you'd probably be looking more at the stream flow indicator. And again, at 2% lowest stream flow, that's going to be a drought level 5 as well. So we're starting to see that improve a bit as we see some more precipitation. But again, Dan, like we've talked about in terms of being well over seeing those fall drought effects from last year continue into now, that's what we're looking at next year potentially as well.
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Actor and comedian Seth Rogan has been back in his hometown of Vancouver and once again dining at a Kitsilano Michelin-recommended eatery. Jonathan Lee, the owner of Little Bird Dim Sum Restaurant, joined Amy Bell on CBC Radio's On the Coast to talk about hosting the celebrity and his family last weekend. Have a listen.
A Vancouver celebrity and comedian was seen celebrating with his family at a local restaurant this weekend.
Actually, quite a few weeks back, my staff had told me, Seth Rogen's sister comes to the restaurant quite a bit. And a couple days after that, actually Seth Rogen graced us for a meal. couple weeks after that, I received an email from his mother asking us, we'd like to buy out your restaurant for a Sunday brunch for a celebration. Complete surprise to me. Was delighted to have them in. We worked with them for a 12-course meal, probably overfed them, more food than necessary.
It's always the best way.
Best way. And we had them in, and we just did our best to serve and have them have a good time. I've never met celebrities before, and the term giddy comes to mind. And I think I was a little giddy. I grew up in Vancouver. I watched all his movies. I follow him on social media.
Yeah.
And when he came in, I was kind of starstruck. I didn't know what to say. He did a lot of talking, and I did a lot of listening, and finally said a few words, and we had a short little conversation. So I think the term probably giddy comes to mind is probably what described me at that point. I was actually speaking with my father, and he actually knows our family. They used to come to our family restaurant, Flamingo. This is prior to him being famous, and they would be regulars there for 45 years. So
you have
it was a
long
coincidence.
history with the Rogan family.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
I wasn't aware of that. My father was.
Dad just neglected to tell you that.
I don't think my father knew how famous he was
Fair enough.
until probably a few years ago when
That's
I
kind of lovely,
had him
though.
watch a movie.
A deep dive into our archives. An LGBTQ+ advocate looks back on his experience being gay in high school and the 1990s. What's changed and perhaps what hasn't after this. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. About 20 people dragged suitcases and reusable bags as they walked the downtown streets of Corner Brook, Newfoundland on Wednesday. They're trying to raise awareness of homelessness in the city on Newfoundland's west coast.
We certainly have a lot of homeless here in our own area, and we want to create that awareness. So for the folks in Corner Brook, it's a lot of hidden homeless. Folks are couch surfing, they're moving from space to space, and so we brought suitcases and reusable bags and things like that, because just packing your belongings up and then moving on to the next spot. And we have some folks that are staying in emergency accommodations, so again, they don't have all of their belongings with them, probably had to leave them in multiple places. So it really is just take what you have and we're going.
I would expect that it's sad, frustrating, and sometimes often feels hopeless, I would expect. And that's visually what we wanted to really kind of represent here, is that idea that, wow, what a burden that is to have to carry everything that is important to you with no real sense of when that's going to end.
I can't imagine it being very comfortable when you don't have a place to call your own. You don't have a kitchen to cook in. You don't have services to do laundry. You are putting things into a bag just to move on to the next spot. I don't think it's very comfortable at all. There's still a lot of folks in our community that might think that we don't have a homeless situation because we're not seeing people on the streets or in tents set up in public common spaces, but it does exist. And we just want to create that awareness that the lack of affordable housing is a huge problem in our community.
It's not just those at the lowest end of the socioeconomic scale, that it is you and I who can be impacted. That, with the price of groceries, the price of heating costs, any one of us could be edged out of the housing market at any time. Most of us are only a few paychecks away, and so that means that this issue is relevant for everybody.
It is Throwback Thursday when we dive deep into our vast CBC archives. In 2016, BC schools required protections for gay, lesbian, and transgender students. And that was a long time coming. This story we're about to show you from 1997 offers a glimpse into the challenges gay high schoolers faced at that time.
Hand me a book.
It's a place to hang out, catch up with friends. But for a gay or lesbian student, a bustling high school hallway can be the loneliest place on earth.
I would walk down the halls. I'd get faggots screamed at me about every 5 seconds. Except in one hall, I got faggots screamed at me by about 20 people at a time for the entire walk.
These kids know all too well what it's like to be gay in a heterosexual world. It's a lesson they learned at school.
I know I'm going to get beaten up, but I don't know when.
Romy Chandra is 17. He came out of the closet a couple of years ago and has endured pretty much constant name-calling ever since. Even our camera in plain view didn't discourage one student from calling Romy a freak.
Now it's to the point where I hear it every day and I'm like, okay, yeah, tell me something that I don't already know. And sometimes I feel like having like a shirt that says fag written all across my shirt, just saying, look, I know this, I know who I am. Don't need to tell me who I am.
Still, Romy admits the abuse hurts, and he says some teachers don't do enough to stop it.
I'd be walking and there'd be a teacher behind me and then a student behind them. And then the student would be calling me faggot or something and the teacher would ignore it.
They did not show any support. They did not say, hi, I can help you, I understand. The closest I ever got was one of my teachers in grade 8 gave me a pamphlet on suicide because he knew I was going to kill myself, and I was at that point because I was so depressed.
In fact, fully 1/3 of teens who commit suicide are gay or lesbian.
There's little in the way of education for educators and parents and other students and counselors dealing with these issues.
This Coquitlam teacher says it's time the school district changed that. He's asked the board to set up a committee that would try to make schools safer for gay, lesbian, and bisexual students.
They're not seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum. Historical and living figures who are gay or lesbian are seldom mentioned.
We certainly understand the issue of the harassment and discrimination that is occurring against gay students in the school system right now, and certainly everyone's very concerned about that.
But not all parents agree that Warren's proposal is the way to deal with it.
Some people feel this issue should not be discussed at all in any form in school, that it's something that should be left totally to the families.
The Coquitlam School District is about to approve an anti-harassment policy similar to ones already in place in districts such as Vancouver.
Just simply telling people that you need to respect other people doesn't make that happen.
But trustees say the policy will be strictly enforced to ensure all students, not just gays and lesbians, are protected.
Hopefully we could move in an inclusive way rather than segregating people even more.
Now, the folks here in the Coquitlam School District aren't the only ones grappling with this issue. BC's teachers will soon get a chance to decide how far they're willing to go to protect gay and lesbian students. When the BC Teachers Federation holds its annual general meeting next month, delegates will vote on a resolution to create a specific program designed to eliminate homophobia in schools.
I think what teachers will all agree, whether they agree with this specific resolution or not, will all agree with is they want their schools to be safe places for all kids.
Still, there is opposition.
There are some teachers that feel they don't have the ability to deal with this kind of issue in their classrooms, so they're a little bit worried about that.
The BCTF has training videos that deal with issues such as homophobia, and it supports the use of books like this one that focus on alternate families. But how much farther it will go in the future is in the hands of its members. Whatever happens, it will come too late for Romy Chandra. He'll graduate next year, and the effects of the homophobic abuse he's already endured will be hard to erase. But he hopes gay teenagers who follow in his footsteps will be able to do so without fear. For Broadcast One, I'm Karen Mason.
And joining us now is Romy Chandra Herbert. He started BC's first Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club and is one of the high schoolers, as we saw featured in that story, the main character. Romy, thanks for joining us. 26 years later, What's going through your mind watching and hearing that again?
So many emotions. It also feels like a bit of a reality show, TV, teen drama that was happening back then. But in all seriousness, the being called names just kind of brought back all those emotions, and not just, towards me, but towards even my friends, straight friends who were called names. And the feeling of, violence and targets of violence was real, but really, nothing really prepared me for later on when I started to lose my friends due to suicide and, drug and alcohol abuse and overdoses. So those became a bit more of a prevalent issue in my life.
You mentioned in that story that teachers don't do much to help students who are being bullied. We heard examples of LGBTQ plus students being called slurs with teachers right there. Now, you've done a lot of work in schools with students. How have things changed over the years, if at all?
It's incredibly drastically has changed. When I look back to those days and we were doing one workshop or one training in a classroom to doing hundreds of workshops and training across the province. During that time, I had started the only one gay straight alliance in my school. And now today there are rainbow clubs across the province in every school district. And those are some of the incredible changes that I'm seeing happening right now.
Is there anything that hasn't changed when you look back on that story?
The feeling of isolation has remained the same for many young people, feeling that the hatred that still exists out there. We're still, while SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity issues are being addressed, there's still communities who are afraid of talking about these issues, using the same kind of fear analogies that happened 26 years ago. But we're still electing politicians municipally, federally, and provincially who hold these views. And so we got to be constantly aware of, all of these rights being taken away.
Romy, we appreciate your time, and this was difficult material to share again, and we thank you for doing that. Lastly, what would you tell perhaps yourself or another student back then about how things may have changed and have changed?
Well, it's, I now have a 6-year-old son, and just going into his classroom in the library and seeing the positive images all over, trans flags, of rainbow flags, and seeing that to the only image that I had growing up was in my own locker of all those positive images. The changes are so incredible and so powerful. And young kids in his classroom, have come up to me and said, "Oh, I hear Dev has 2 dads." And in my mind, I'm like ready to prepare myself for a mini presentation to the kid. But I said, yes, I guess, he does have 2 dads. And the kid's like, "Oh, cool," and runs off into the playground. And my kid looks at me, smiles, and runs after him. And, and that's it. That's what it is. And that's what's been really wonderful to see, that kind of change.
Romy, Chandra, Herbert, we appreciate your time, your perspective, and your experience. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The Rainbow Bridge has reopened after Wednesday's deadly car explosion at the Ontario-New York border. The latest on the investigation after the break.
These are my favorite. I used to be a ring girl for a wrestling company, so I made wings on all my costumes, and I felt like a superhero wearing them. Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm the wardrobe wench for KISS. I've been working with the band for 20 years, but I've been on this tour, End of the Road like, for the past 2 years. I like the band, they're nice. They're nice to me, they tolerate me. They think I'm a weirdo, but I can do my job, so they put up with that. When I was living in Montreal, I had no idea I'd be working for KISS. I knew they existed, I knew their music, but it was just, I was punk rock, so this isn't punk rock, but it's really cool. I'm a glorified cleaning lady, and I don't care. I clean the costumes, maintain them, make sure they're all fixed. If anything breaks, either fix it myself or find someone who's better than me to fix it. Every night, I'm responsible for getting the blood off of this, making sure it's not stinky, and prepping it We get cheap vodka and we mix it with tea tree oil or lavender and put it in a spray pump and spray everything, and the smell goes away. I'll show you Paul's boots because they're beautiful. This is a perfect job for me because I like shiny leather, studs, and spandex and buckles and belts, so I'm pretty happy. I buff all the residue from him playing guitar and shoe polish off every night, and he wears these on his hands like cuffs when he plays guitar. All mirrors. His guitar strap is fed underneath so he can play. So I have to put Gene in his armor so he could perform on stage, because you can't really do this yourself because it's a bunch of clips and the clips clip onto other things and everything's in the back. So it means a lot to me to work and be here and think, wow, this is probably the best job I ever had in Montreal, and I'll be leaving tonight, but it's good.
The FBI has confirmed Wednesday's dramatic car explosion at the Rainbow Bridge in Niagara Falls was not linked to terrorism. 2 people were killed and a border guard was hurt. Ithel Musa has the latest.
Police in western New York State are combing through what little is left behind after a fiery car crash Wednesday abruptly closed the Rainbow Bridge, linking Niagara Falls, Ontario to Niagara Falls, New York. The car on the American side of the bridge suddenly accelerated before flying through the air and exploding into flames. For some, thoughts immediately turned to the possibility of terrorism.
The hair in the back of my neck stood up, and I thought, here we go again.
In the chaos that followed, the Prime Minister and the U.S. President were briefed. 3 other nearby crossings were also closed. The FBI now confirms no explosive materials were found at the scene. Local police have taken over what's being called a traffic investigation. But on this American Thanksgiving weekend, a normally busy travel time left this unusual sight: the Rainbow Bridge empty.
All of a sudden, everybody's holiday plans were halted when the borders closed, and everybody shuddered.
The holiday would normally pack this Indian restaurant on the Canadian side of the border.
I feel so miserable. I don't know what's happening. All of a sudden, the Niagara Falls has nothing in here. This is the weekend when we get so busy. It's Thursday, Thanksgiving weekend, and nobody's around. I'll say by the table-wise, yes, 15, 20 tables at this time. I should have it, yes.
Police say the vehicle was incinerated in the crash. The 2 occupants are dead. American media is reporting they were a local Western New York couple. Ithel Musa, CBC News, Niagara Falls, Ontario.
For the first time since a 5th estate investigation into Buffy St Maries' claims to Indigenous heritage, the singer is pushing back in a public statement. Jeff Leo broke the story and has her response.
The 5th Estate located Buffy St Maries' birth certificate in the town hall of Stoneham, Massachusetts, contrary to her often repeated claim that she was born in Saskatchewan.
I can say absolutely with 100% certainty that
this is the original birth certificate.
In her statement released today, St. Maries says it was quite shocking to hear a city clerk say she had 100% confidence in its authenticity. She added that she had a birth certificate for her whole life, but never knew if it was authentic. However, for decades, she had claimed she had no birth certificate. In her statement, she also points out that it was common for birth certificates of Indigenous children to be created by Western governments. St. Marie claims that may have happened in this case.
I think she's grasping at straws, really.
Michelle Good is a retired lawyer from the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. She says the details on the certificate indicate to her that it is original.
The weight of the child, the time of the birth, those kinds of things you're not going to see, in my opinion, on a replacement birth certificate.
St. Marie says the most important thing is that she has been adopted by a family on the Piapot First Nation and accepted in the community. She writes that being an Indian has little to do with sperm tracking or colonial record keeping. It has to do with community, culture, knowledge, teaching, who claims you, who you love. Michelle Good disagrees.
That you cannot choose to be Indigenous. It's something that you are born as.
This is all just as new and confusing to us as it is to anyone.
Ira LaValle is the acting chief of the Piapot First Nation. He says people in his community are divided. They were hoping she would make a statement to clear things up. But he says this statement fails to do that.
I wish Buffy would give us a reason to defend her or not.
LaValle says many in his community are still prepared to embrace St. Marie despite the controversy. But he says others are waiting for proof that she does have Indigenous ancestry. To date, Buffy St. Marie has not addressed these issues with CBC. Jeff Leo, CBC News, Regina.
We are now hours away from a pause in the fighting between Israel and Hamas. The two sides have agreed to a temporary ceasefire in return for the release of dozens of Israeli hostages. And as Sasha Petrusik explains, some Palestinians being held in Israeli prisons will also be freed.
With a deal done in Qatar,
the beginning of the pause will be 7 a.m. Friday.
Israelis sang in Tel Aviv, daring to believe 13 women and children being held hostage will be free tomorrow afternoon.
I want to hope, I hope that it's going to happen.
Hoping also that all 240 of those kidnapped by the militant group Hamas will follow.
And 13 is nothing next to the amount we want to have back.
Once the first group leaves through this crossing into Egypt, Israel's committed to start releasing Palestinian women and teens from its jails in exchange. 150 in all. Up to 300 aid trucks will also be allowed in every day. But for those in Gaza who woke up to this again today, Israeli missiles pounding their neighborhood, sending children to hospital. It's the 4-day pause in airstrikes they want most, though they don't trust it'll happen. What kind of truce, he asks? They are attacking children. Israel insists it is after Hamas and that the short break will be followed by more determined fighting.
But we'll continue with our war aims, namely to eradicate Hamas.
Still, negotiators believe they can yet turn this pause into a full stop.
And of course, our aim is for this deal to end with a lasting truce.
A deal that's the first hopeful sign in almost 7 weeks of fighting. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Toronto.
Despite that ceasefire, there are growing concerns about journalists, particularly Palestinian reporters who are covering the war. Chris Brown explains.
Asuna Salim knew his job could get him killed. As journalists in Gaza, we're subject to being targeted, he said on Instagram. Saturday morning, he shot this video of the aftermath of an Israeli strike on the Boreja refugee camp. Hours later, he was among 31 people killed in a follow-up strike on the same area. His devastated family, now sheltering at a Gaza school, spoke to a Palestinian journalist working for CBC News. He didn't have a tank or a plane or weapons to fight back, said his mother. My son died because he was trying to deliver the voice of truth. Besides Gaza, 3 journalists in Lebanon have been killed by Israeli strikes, 2 of them on Tuesday, making this the deadliest month since casualty records started being kept 30 years ago, says this advocate.
So the situation is absolutely horrendous. What we're seeing really is the elimination by Israel of journalism in Gaza.
In a statement to CBC News, Israel's military said the IDF has never and will never deliberately target journalists, but then added certain journalists who were reportedly killed were active terror operatives.
Israel says it is not deliberately targeting journalists, but at the same time it has refused to put the protections in place that are required under international humanitarian law to ensure that journalists in conflict can continue their jobs safely.
0. There's no safe place.
Yin Kudari is a freelancer who regularly files for Turkish television.
We don't have a place to sleep, and we're displaced, and we're also striving to have food just like hundreds of thousands of other people.
There's also a vicious information war to contend with. An Israeli politician said journalists should be hunted down after a false account was posted that some took part in the October 7th massacres. Reporters Without Borders is among the groups calling for an end to the dangerous rhetoric and for the International Criminal Court to investigate the killing of journalists. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
It is Indigenous Fashion Week here in Vancouver. We hit the runway to find out what's turning heads right after this.
It's a big bone with big history. This is the femur of a mastodon, an extinct species that once roamed the forests of Nova Scotia. The bone was discovered in the 1830s by Alexander McCrae, a Gaelic settler and farmer in Middle River.
I can only imagine as he's plowing his fields and getting ready to make a new life for himself in that area, what was going through his head when he encountered this huge mastodon femur, and in all likelihood he wouldn't have known what it was at the time.
This 75,000-year-old bone is visiting the Highland Village in Iona as part of the Age of the Mastodon exhibit. The traveling display features mastodon fossils and other artifacts, along with a full-size skeleton cast made by a company that worked on the film Jurassic Park.
To me, I think that's one of the great things about museums in general, is that it's not just about learning about the things. It's about being able to experience it, yourself and have your own personal interaction with something like this and the fossils themselves.
Created by the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History, the traveling exhibit takes hours to set up. So far, it's already stopped in the communities of Stellarton and Yarmouth, and this year marked a homecoming for the bone, nicknamed Big Sandy, in honor of the man who discovered it.
It's the first time that it's been here since the 1830s. So it is really special to be able to have that sort of return home. And it reminds people that mastodons like this didn't just live in a part of Nova Scotia, they lived in all parts of Nova Scotia.
School children and others are flocking to hear more about the elephant-like giants whose bones have turned up in Cape Breton over the years. And that's a welcome boost to the Highland Village, which is staying open for its first winter tourism season this year.
So there is some curiosity around what it's all about, and I think that the Age of Mastodon is certainly going to provide some answers and some insight for folks as they think about those finds, recent and also from the past.
Age of the Mastodon will be on display in Iona from now until March. Staff at the Museum of Natural History in Halifax say because of its success, they're now looking at creating other traveling exhibits that could be spread out across the province. Erin Potty, CBC News, Iona.
All week long, Indigenous Fashion Week has been front and center stage at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, just across the street here. But do people know it's even happening? The CBC's Edziu Loverin hit the streets to find out.
We're here in downtown Vancouver on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, asking people what they know about Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week. Do you know about Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week?
No, I don't.
Do you like going to fashion shows?
Yes. What else would one do?
It showcases Indigenous designers and Indigenous models.
Oh, that's so good. You look beautiful. You're like a model too.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's incredibly important as a Canadian to support Indigenous creators, Indigenous designers.
It's amazing, and I would love to see more of it. We should see it everywhere, not just Fashion Week, but everywhere.
Yeah, authentic representation.
Absolutely.
And I honestly don't know anything about Indigenous fashion, so that would be for me a point of departure, right? Like, let's find out.
Here we are at Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. Let's go in.
This is our fourth installation of Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week. We're also the first Indigenous Fashion Week in the world, which is pretty cool, and we're just getting bigger. I think Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week means to Indigenous audience members that there's a place to belong, and there's also a place to come and wear your best, walk in your finest, and just like enjoy being a part of the fabric of all this beautiful things that you see around you, all this culture, all this art. Like, I think it's a movement.
Very encouraging to the youth to see that we are doing things as a whole, Indigenous people, making change, that it is possible to do.
Highlight and amplify joy and beauty and culture, things that oftentimes is seen as historical or past-based, and we're not. We're here, we're present, we have vibrant cultures, we're alive, and we're so willing and open to share those cultures.
You know, you see all the New York Fashion Week, and it's like all the really light-skinned individuals or white people, and like, you know, it gives different sizes and different colors, different skin tones of women, and you know, all individuals, just that runway and the big spotlight, you know.
It's community, you know, this, like, we see people that we don't see all year, and they come out to Indigenous Fashion Week, and it's all love.
Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week closes on Friday with the Supernaturals Kiki Ball at Performance Works Theatre. Edziu Loverin, CBC News, Vancouver.
Time for our BC-wide forecast, the full version with Darius Madavi, and we need to talk about drought again.
Yes, I know it's late November. Why are we still talking about drought? Because we're still in severe drought conditions, and it's not going away anytime soon. So let's look at, according to the British Columbia Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan, quite a mouthful, and I know this looks like quite a dense chart, but what this is showing is that at the beginning of the season, we take into account how much snowpack we have and how much water we're expecting to come into our water basins across BC, and that determines what your drought level is at the beginning of the season. So coming into this season, we had record low levels of snowpack across the province, setting us up for what could have or was already expected to be a severe drought season. Once you get into the core of the drought season, you need to have bottom 2% of precipitation levels and bottom 2% of stream flow levels to qualify as being level 5. So we have had these severe conditions across parts of BC throughout much of the season. In the Northeast, we're still seeing those conditions, and seeing that across an entire year, an entire drought season, is quite unprecedented, to be quite honest with you. But they also take into account some of the secondary drought factors, things like air temperature. We saw record heat in parts of BC this year. Aquifer levels, we've seen very low aquifer and groundwater levels across parts of BC. Long-term precipitation deficit, so this is looking at not just the last 30 days, as we do for the primary drought determinant, but also a much longer-term trend, multi-year trends. Like I said, last year we've had that severe fall drought. That's continuing into this year. And lastly, ecosystem impacts. So we've seen not just impacts on farmers and ranchers, but also impacts in the natural ecosystems for salmon and other animals as well. Now, this isn't going to leave anytime soon. Across BC, we have this high-pressure ridge that's sticking around over the next few days. Not expecting to see that go away until maybe the weekend for the north, where we might see a bit of precipitation as we get into early next week. But again, not anytime soon. If you take a look at our precipitation map, you can see that those dry conditions happening across the province, aside from some scattered flurries and showers happening in northwest BC. Nothing going to happen at all this week. And then temperatures, again, because of the high pressure, we stay dry, but also cooler than usual, so expect slightly cooler temperatures. Tomorrow, expect those sunnier conditions as a result of the ridge of high pressure. And here in Vancouver, once again, consistent but boring forecast. Cool temperatures and sunny skies.
Boring is okay on occasion. Thanks, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
An ongoing city problem has become an inside joke for Regina residents. After the break, we show you the festive makeover it recently got. Stick around for this.
Whenever someone needs help, Captain Orlando is here to volunteer. Today, Captain Orlando and his big helper take on Mission Snack Packs.
This is the last one, Captain.
Oh, you are such a big helper. These snacks are going to be perfect to help our neighbors who don't have enough to eat.
You mean perfect for me to gobble up? Ha 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 ha! Hardy har har evil! Ha ha ha!
You done?
Ha! Yes, I'm done.
Great. Great, Gus, you old so-and-so. What are you doing here?
I'm getting a snack, of course. Actually, every snack! Ha ha ha! This one's mine, this one. That over there, mine. That's mine there too.
Wait, you can't have all of those.
Well, why not?
Because we are here to volunteer. On your marks, get set, help!
Haha, bread is mine.
I volunteer.
Cheese is mine.
To make sandwiches.
Lettuce is mine.
For all the snack packs.
Foiled again!
I volunteer to pack the sandwiches with some snacks and drinks into these bags. Oh, Gus, thank you very much. That drink goes into this bag.
Fine.
Very good, Gus.
You happy now?
Yes, I am.
I volunteer to deliver all this food to hungry people in need.
No! It's time for me to get something. If I'm not allowed to eat the snacks, then I will carry the snacks. All of the snacks! Ha ha ha! Ha 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 ha!
Do you think he knows how helpful that is?
The spirit of volunteering is in all of us. Even greedy Gus.
Yeah! The carrying job is all mine! Ha ha! And you can't stop me! All mine! Ha ha!
Proud of you, Gus!
Ha ha ha! Thank you! Ha ha!
What a nice fellow.
Yeah, it's a lot of bags.
There it is. You're looking at a live shot of Vancouver's iconic Lights of Hope outside St. Paul's Hospital in downtown Vancouver. Fireworks are back this year. They were just on for the first time since 2019. Oh, there's a few more. Lights of Hope is a holiday tradition in this city. Yeah, let's pan up a little bit. Thank you, Simone. Very good. The holiday lights have been displayed outside the hospital since 1998. Cool. A Regina neighborhood has its own community Christmas tree this year, but it's in an unusual place. In the middle of the street, above a pothole.
Oh, about a month ago, the little Christmas tree went up and somebody came along and put a stand underneath it and lights and then presents and socks.
The pothole appeared in July, but is due to be fixed early next month, leaving the tree's fate for Christmas Day uncertain. Got some Charlie Brown vibes. Somebody will take it. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC GM, our free app, as well as on YouTube, and of course our website, cbc.ca/BC. I will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. We'll see you then.